June 4, 1943. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unofficer Herman Butcher held tightly to the ship's rail as he made his way down the gangplank, his legs shaky after a 2-week Atlantic crossing. Gazing through the morning mist, he encountered a scene that defied 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Dockworkers in America, both white and black, worked side by side operating machines that looked as if they were from another era. Women dressed in coveralls maneuvered cranes. At the gates, children offered newspapers for sale. No one ran in fear upon seeing enemy uniforms. Die Spin and De American Americana, he quietly murmured to the man following him. The Americans are insane. Butcher would later record this episode in his memoir Behind Barbed Wire, which was published in Germany in 1952. It stands as one of the most thorough descriptions of POW existence in America. The Norfolk facility covered 4,300 acres. Its piers extended as far as the eye could see, its cranes constantly loading or unloading many ships at once. In one morning, this single harbor moved more cargo than what Hamburg could handle in a week. Yet, it was not the magnitude of the place that shocked the new captives. It was the ordinariness. Civilians strolled openly near military zones. Food vendors sold coffee and donuts within view of battleships. A brass band was performing hit tunes at a nearby war bond event. 2,500 veterans from Rommel's Africa Corps assembled on American ground. This grouping was the first substantial group out of what would total 425,000 German POWs held in the United States by the conflict's conclusion. What they would see in months ahead was more than just American plenty. That narrative is already known. What they would observe was much more disturbing to soldiers' mentality. A country waging war but refusing to act accordingly. A society so confident in its strength that it treated its deadly foes as if they were unruly house guests, and whose odd traditions and baffling behaviors would do more damage to Nazi beliefs than any loss on the battlefield. Processing for new arrivals at Norfolk began with what Butcher would later recount in his memoir as the earliest impossibility. In German military policy from Poland to France and Africa, POWs were used either as resources to exploit or burdens to discard. The Geneva Convention would be followed only when it suited. Yet in this setting, American officers recited Geneva rulebooks in fluent German, explaining rights and asking about special dietary needs. International Red Cross records from June 1943 show that Jewish Americans, including some sergeants with obviously Jewish last names, handed out Red Cross parcels while explaining that kosher meals were available if any prisoners were Jewish. A number of Wehrmacht men chuckled uneasily, assuming some kind of mockery. It was not. The U.S. Army had actually accounted for religious food rules for its adversaries. The medical checks contradicted all usual military practice. German prisoners suffering from wounds received the same penicillin, this life-saving medicine rarely seen in German field hospitals, as American servicemen. Swiss Red Cross official Guy Matroy documented in his July 1943 report, medical treatment for German POWs matches or surpasses what American troops receive. Prisoners were amazed at the standard of care. At Norfolk, African American medics worked in integrated groups, although this was not the case throughout the American armed forces. One particular incident involved a black medical technician drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for standard health tests. In Germany, such racial interaction was against the law. In the United States military, it was part of routine. The most bewildering scene unfolded during their initial meal. German POWs were led into a dining hall where American sailors were also having lunch. These two groups, who had only recently tried to kill each other in convoy fights, dined in the same room, with Americans at one side and Germans at the other, using the same serving lines, receiving identical meals. The Americans appeared largely indifferent, paying more attention to a radio broadcast of a baseball game than to the presence of their enemy merely 50 feet away. The 3-day train ride to camps located inland introduced the next stage of cognitive dissonance. In contrast to the covert prisoner transport methods in Germany, U.S. officials did nothing to conceal the PSWs. The trains consisted of passenger cars with upholstered seats rather than boxcars, making regular stops at stations where local residents gathered to watch. At Union Station in Washington, D.C., as recorded in station logs from June 1943 and seen by hundreds, German prisoners observed American families saying goodbye to soldiers departing for training camps. Wives publicly embraced their husbands in farewell. Children waved small flags. Teenagers enjoyed milkshakes together at the station's restaurant. That same platform accommodated both enemy prisoners and servicemen's families, separated only by barriers and guards primarily busy with traffic flow, not supervision of prisoners. The trains traveled through industrial districts that ideally should have been masked, concealed, and secured. On the contrary, factories featured their names in enormous signage. At Baltimore's Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Factory, parking lots filled with employees' personal vehicles were visible from the train. Prisoners could make a tally of B-26 bombers lined up for shipment. There was no attempt at secrecy, no panic over security, but rather American business in operation before the eyes of their adversaries. While crossing Pennsylvania, trains passed coalfields and steelworks operating ceaselessly. Blast furnaces kept the night above aglow with orange light. Worker housing consisted of individual homes with their own gardens. No barracks stretched for miles near each industrial plant. Electric lights shone from every house. Radio wires protruded from the rooftops. During a pause in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, as logged in the Pennsylvania Railroad registers, German officers observed factory employees changing shifts. Men carried lunch pails, wore wristwatches and leather shoes, and drove private cars. According to Butcher's memoirs, one laborer discarded a half-eaten apple and pulled a new one from his lunchbox. The easy disregard for food by an American worker shocked seasoned officers whose troops had scuffled over scraps in Africa. Camp Hearn, Texas, began operations in December 1942 on a 720-acre site near Hearn in Robertson County. Army paperwork confirms it was designed to accommodate as many as 4,800 German prisoners in conditions surpassing what the majority knew as civilians. The establishment, construction, and management of the camp are extensively detailed in Army Corps of Engineers reports and War Department documents stored at the National Archives. Just the camp's facilities conflicted with German expectations of prisoner treatment. Wood barracks featured electric lighting rather than oil lamps. Indoor restrooms included flushing toilets and hot water heaters in every structure. Each man received his own bed, equipped with a mattress, sheets, and blankets rather than using straw pads. Recreational halls provided ping-pong tables, music instruments, and libraries. Swiss Inspector Emil Sandstorm wrote in his August 1943 report that conditions at Camp Hearn exceed the Geneva Convention guidelines as well as the living standards familiar to many of these men in Germany. The camp's leader, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, whose record remains in military archives, spoke directly to new prisoners in German. He had learned German at university prior to wartime. He outlined the camp's regulations, but also explained something new. Within the compounds, prisoners would largely be self-administered. They held elections for spokesmen, organized their own events, and scheduled their day-to-day life as long as it fit military guidelines. Granting self-government to prisoners of war struck some as either a sign of frailty or a hidden snare. The camp infirmary, which the International Red Cross checked each month, contained equipment unavailable in many German civilian hospitals. Facilities included X-ray devices, surgical operating rooms, dental chairs, drugs, and the new miracle medication penicillin. When prisoner Georg Gartner, who would be recognized as the final POW to surrender in 1985, developed appendicitis in September 1943, he underwent surgery within hours. Army surgeon Captain William Calhoun of Dallas performed the procedure, aided by German POW medical workers. Yet even this failed to prepare prisoners for the camp's canteen, the store allowing them to buy goods with scrip earned through voluntary work. Cigarettes, chocolate bars, soap, stationery, music supplies, and art materials were for sale. These sales, documented in Quartermaster Corps files, had been approved by the War Department, on the theory that permitting minor luxuries would keep up morale and lower the risk of escapes. The realization that enemy captives were permitted to shop, to make personal purchases luxuries beyond what was required merely to survive conflicted with military logic. Labor shortages by September 1943 prompted authorities to extend POW employment throughout Texas. The War Manpower Commission, collaborating with the Provost Marshal General's Office, sanctioned the use of prisoners in agriculture and other non-military sectors. Prisoners' daily pay was 80 cents in canteen currency, the same basic wage as U.S. privates. The particulars of these labor assignments are preserved in National Archives Record Group 389. On the King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German prisoners witnessed American agriculture on a scale far beyond anything in Europe. The spread covered 825,000 acres, surpassing Rhode Island in area. Ranch financial records from 1943 to 1945 demonstrate that German POWs worked alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and a few black ranch workers within the cattle division. On-the-job racial mixing, though not extending into social life, openly conflicted with Nazi racial ideology. In their censored letters, prisoners expressed wonder at the extent of mechanization. One combine harvester did the work of many laborers. Crop transport happened by truck, never by horses and wagons. Civilian planes, even, flew over herds for aerial observation and straying cattle location. Employment records showed that ranch manager Richard Clayburgh Jr. regarded German POWs as temporary recruits, not as foes. Cotton gins all over Texas, such as the known operations in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, gave prisoners a glimpse of processing rates unknown in Europe. The Hearne Cotton Oil Mill, which employed POWs from August 1943 through December 1945, moved more cotton in one day than German mills typically processed in a month. Workers took consistent breaks, were served complete lunches, and enjoyed music from radios while at work. Efficient output combined with cooperative treatment rather than rigid punishment defied former Wehrmacht experience. The prisoners learned that American farmers spoke freely about political matters. FBI surveillance records, made public in the 1970s, observed that German POWs were astonished to see farmers openly criticize Roosevelt and freely voice their complaints about government policies without any fear of retribution. In one noted event on a farm close to Bryan, Texas, a farmer told a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell amidst a dispute over crop assignments. The farmer suffered no punishment. This sort of defiance towards authority could have resulted in execution in Nazi Germany. Newspapers across Texas reported on meetings between German prisoners and American locals. The Hearne Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram each published articles about work crews and their contacts within the community. These contemporaneous reports serve as documentation of social exchanges that left the military prisoners astonished. In December 1943, the Hearne Democrat described German PSWs participating in chaperone Christmas shopping trips, where they observed American teenage social habits. Young people assembled at pharmacy soda counters. Boys and girls socialized together without adult supervision. They danced to jukebox songs, including jazz and swing music, genres that the Nazis branded as degenerate Negro music. They wore up-to-date fashions in spite of wartime conditions, with no sign of youth being militarized. The conduct of American women was especially startling to the prisoners. Women were seen driving trucks for the Hearne Cotton Oil Mill, running businesses on Main Street, and overseeing male employees in defense factories. Near Bryan, at the Army Airfield, which was a base for the Women Air Force Service Pilots WP program, women pilots flew military planes. Official records verify that WASPs were based at Bryan Field between 1943 and 1944, in plain view of work units in the vicinity. Churches all over Robertson County welcomed German prisoners to their congregations. Documentation from First Baptist Church of Hearne, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church all record German P attendance at religious services. The December 24, 1943, issue of the Herne Democrat stated, German prisoners attended Christmas Eve services at several churches, sitting among parishioners whose sons were serving abroad. No incidents were reported. By the start of 1944, the Prost Marshal General's Office's Special Projects Section had launched advanced educational initiatives at Camp Herne. Records that have been declassified from Record Group 389 show the breadth of this covert re-education initiative, which prisoners knew simply as voluntary schooling. The camp's library, which began with 500 books contributed by Herne residents, expanded to more than 5,000 titles by August 1944. The American Library Association's prisoner book program supplied texts including works by German writers forbidden by the Nazis. Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and the works of Jewish authors such as Lion Feuchtwanger were available. A German P had access to books for which possession in Nazi Germany would have been a capital offense. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now called Sam Houston State University, supplied correspondence classes. University files indicate 340 German PSWs signed up for studies including English, American history, math, and agricultural science from 1944 to 1945. Faculty from the college visited Camp Herne every month to give lectures and administer tests. It is necessary to clarify details regarding the camp newspaper. Although Der Ruf was actually published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, the inmates at Camp Herne published their own paper titled Der Spiegel, The Mirror, and this should not be mixed up with the later German news magazine. Surviving editions in the Army Heritage and Education Center reveal a shift from Nazi propaganda in early 1943 to discussions about democracy by late 1944. Declassified Special Projects Division files uncover refined psychological strategies. The program classified prisoners into three segments. Anti-Nazis made up about 10%, non-political inmates accounted for 75%, and staunch Nazis formed 15%. Each classification was treated differently to stimulate maximal ideological change. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through thorough examination of correspondence, discussions, and reading material, got extra benefits and educational opportunities. These prisoners were promoted to leaders in their barracks, moderators for discussion groups, and newspaper staff. Their sway over apolitical prisoners was carefully fostered and observed. The evaluation procedures introduced by Army psychologists and German immigrant advisors featured nuanced assessments. Observers meticulously recorded how prisoners responded to reports of German defeats, their library reading selections, involvement in educational initiatives, and manner of social engagement. Camp-wide ideological changes were noted in weekly updates. Major Maxwell McKnight, the assistant executive officer whose records reside at the Hoover Institution, stated in a November 1944 document, "The pace of change has surpassed predictions. Roughly 60% of apolitical prisoners exhibit a tangible shift towards democratic values after half a year immersed in American culture and specific schooling." Experiences in American workplaces exposed prisoners of war to an effortless abundance that appeared almost as ridicule compared to German deprivation. At the Alcoa aluminum facility in Rockdale, Texas, where PS began handling materials as of September 1943, more aluminum scrap was thrown out daily by workers than German aircraft factories could gather in a full week. Documentation shows German PSWs were tasked with collecting scrap, placing them in first-hand contact with America's industrial excess. The shock was most pronounced at food processing sites. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, verified by Milne County historical sources for using PWs from nearby Camp Herne, entirely edible produce was trashed over slight imperfections. Slightly unripe tomatoes, corn with inconsistent kernels, beans with small spots, all destroyed while Germans at home faced famine. According to a letter from P. Corporal Friedrich Müller held in Red Cross archives, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit for not meeting canning quality." Fruit considered priceless in Germany here is mere refuse. The American supervisor expressed regret over the waste. unaware he was apologizing for an affluence unimaginable to us. The 1943 Christmas at Camp Hearn is thoroughly chronicled in local press, Red Cross documentation, and Army files. The complete population of Hearn, numbering 2,000, coordinated to guarantee that prisoner enemies would enjoy a true Christmas. This treatment of foes contradicted all assumed wartime norms. On December 23, 1943, the Hearn Democrat listed every donation. Area churches gathered 4,800 distinct gift parcels. Schools provided handmade decorations and greeting cards. American Legion Post 164, composed of World War I veterans who once battled Germans, supplied cigarettes, candy, and recreational equipment to present-day German prisoners. The Lions Club distributed musical instruments. The Garden Club adorned the camp with holly and evergreen garlands. The Christmas tree at the camp, captured in a photograph for the local paper, rose to 30 feet in the principal enclosure, adorned with electric lights left on at all hours. Quartermaster files reveal the camp consumed more electricity for its Christmas displays than entire German towns used for everything. Such a brilliant display of lights was inconceivable even in peacetime Germany. Local congregations performed Christmas music in German for the prisoners. The choir from First Methodist learned German carols by rote. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose son fought in Italy, directed the musical offering as choir director. The mental conflict of American mothers serenading enemy soldiers while their own sons fought Germans emotionally overwhelmed several prisoners. As guard accounts relate, the Christmas banquet detailed in supply officer records included roast turkey, a pound per prisoner, ham, candied yams, string beans, cornbread stuffing, cranberry relish, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted personnel, and California wine for officers. Each meal provided about 5,000 calories to the individual. At the same time, ordinary Germans at home, when they could get food at all, received just 1,200 calories a day. Service in Texas offered German PSWs a view of racial realities in America that both contradicted Nazi doctrine and exceeded American stereotypes. What actually occurred, according to Army records and local reporting, was far more intricate than either depiction. At Camp Hearn, African American soldiers of the 359th Infantry sometimes acted as guards. Germans, ingrained with Nazi racial tenets, now found themselves commanded by Black Americans. Multiple prisoners sought reassignment to avoid accepting orders from Black personnel, but their petitions were refused by administrators. Lieutenant Colonel Stiles remarked in his December 1943 summary, "Protests from German prisoners regarding Black guards are noted and disregarded." Nonetheless, the prisoners also observed inconsistencies in segregation. They were permitted to dine in Hearn restaurants that would not serve the Black guards overseeing them. They could attend cinemas where their guards were barred from the main seating. In certain situations, German enemies enjoyed greater social privileges than Black American citizens. Encountering this contradiction, being shown more rights as enemy foreigners than some Americans, upended the ideology of many, as seen during agricultural labor documented by Farm Security Administration files. Prisoners labored beside Mexican American and Black workers. The productivity of integrated work teams, when focused on tasks instead of race, called into question the Nazi tenet that racial purity produced effectiveness. German prisoners picked cotton alongside Black laborers who outpaced them, confronting and overturning their ideas of racial superiority. 3 extensively documented incidents demonstrate the conversion of German POWs during their time in America. Continues.